Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Untethering Shame podcast, where we're talking all things shame so as to dismantle its hold on us and lean into a life of shame resilience. I'm beyond excited for today's episode, where we're talking pageants. From the pressure in and around them, the myths, assumptions, and judgments we have of the competition and contestants, the roots and systems of oppression, privilege, and the patriarchy, and the impact of highly competitive environments on the competitors, we're going there. And I'm beyond excited to be diving into this topic with my guest, Jessica Hammer. Jessica has been in the pageant world for over 10 years and has gone through her own journey in facing, overcoming, and fighting against some of these shame-based systems, rewriting her own story and learning to let go of her shame. She's passionate about changing the conversation and norms of the pageant world and has found a way to really focus on community in the process of what's often thought to be such a cutthroat and competitive world. In addition to her role and experience in the Miss America and Miss USA organizations, Jessica is a daughter, sister, friend, and a rescue mom to a pit bull and senior kitty. By day, she's also a remote digital communication specialist, managing social media strategy and content creation for a global manufacturing company, and is also a fantastic writer and blogger, using her voice to empower others to lean into and celebrate their truths and selves. Jessica is the type of person you meet and you're instantly drawn to. She is the definition of beauty in that she is the type of person who wants to see and understand the world. From the first time I met her, I was drawn to her and her ability to make everyone feel special, heard, and safe. She is kind beyond words, and no matter what interruptions present themselves in a conversation, she has this way of always coming back and making sure you know that you have her attention. Now, while my experience in the pageant world was short-lived, 2 years in the Little Miss Berlin pageant in elementary school, I got a glimpse into the pressures, wonder, and possibilities of the pageant world. And as someone who's fought against the demons of perfection and low self-worth, I can only imagine how hard that journey could be in a container like this. So, what should we do? Let's dive in. All right, Jessica, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited that you're here.
Thank you. Wow, what an intro. I'm so excited too. This is so great.
Well, I have been thinking about this for months since reaching out and then sort of anxiously anticipating where we were going to go. And so I'm curious, just coming into this conversation, I like to do a feelings check-in with everybody as we get started. So what would you say is one word to describe how you're feeling right now about life, this conversation, whatever you want?
Oh, I guess it'll be 2 words. I'm going to say new chapter because I'm going to do 2. Mainly because I just came off of competing for a state Miss USA competition and have kind of closed that chapter on my life in the competition sense. But I'm also still diving into all of these facets of my life, and whether that's work or, entering this new phase of relationship and friendships and family. And it's an exciting new transition right now where I'm at. So new chapter is a good way to say.
I like that. And I think that is life in general. Is sometimes I think where shame gets us is we get stuck in a past chapter, or we are constantly trying to rework and rewrite a certain chapter of our life to get it right, to get it perfect. And we forget that we're no longer that person, or that doesn't match for us, or that it is okay for that chapter to feel incomplete or like it was messy and off course, and kind of to turn to the new one. And so I'm sure, as we'll get into in this conversation, there's parts as you close this chapter in the pageant world and something that's been such an integral part of your life. There's grief, there is longing, there's loss, but there's also a sense of completeness and hope and wonder. And that kind of experience being an amalgamation of all those things can be so powerful.
Exactly. Yeah, I very much agree.
So, okay, take us, we know you're kind of at the end of certain roles and routes in the pageant world, but let's go back to where it started. So tell me, how did you find yourself being in all of this world?
Oh, I remember very early on when I was just a little girl, maybe 10 or 12. And I had caught a glimpse of the Toddlers and Tiaras show on TLC, which was not a great representation of what my experience was like. But I had caught a glimpse of it and I was like, oh my gosh, what in the world is this whole world?
Yeah.
And I remember writing a letter to my mom because I was too afraid to talk to her about it and say, I think I want to try something like this at some point. But that was kind of nixed because I think that she knew that at that point in my life that this is probably not something I was ready for. And in hindsight, I'm really glad that I didn't enter the pageant world until later on. So it wasn't until I was 17 that I had my first pageant experience. I had been approached by a family friend of mine who was a local director for a competition in the Miss America organization in my hometown. And she said, hey, I need a couple more girls to participate. This is just a great opportunity to put yourself out there and get involved in the community a little bit. And there is a scholarship at the end of it. So if you are interested, would love to have you. So I thought, this is my Toddlers and Tiaras moment. I'm going to go after it. And so I decided to go for it. And I put myself in head first, not knowing any idea what I was doing. And I thought that this would be a good opportunity just to, one, earn some scholarships because I was going to college the next year, and two, get a little bit more involved in my community and talk about things that are important to me, because there was that platform aspect of it throughout my entire involvement. And that was something important to me. So I dove in headfirst at 17 and I'm 27 now. So since then, I just caught the bug and it's been a blur ever since.
Wow. And do you feel like, so there was that part of you that was like, what is this? I'm pulled to want to do this. And then there was this waiting period. And then again, the opportunity presents itself. You're in a different headspace, but you still have that pull. You still have this excitement. And yeah, now the pull is different. It's scholarships. It's putting yourself out there. It's all these next steps. What do you think, what was the glimmer or the sparkle when you saw the show that then showed up again when you were 17? What was that actual hook?
I think, the hook to me when I was really young was all the glitz and glamour. I was like, I could be a real life little princess on a stage. And that sounds like so much fun. But then later on, it came down to a point in my life where I was looking for opportunities for leadership. I was looking for ways to put stuff on my resume. And I've always kind of been like that high achiever. I want to, stack my resume and put stuff on there. But that was kind of that hook at that time where I was like, this could be really fun and glamorous and I can meet new people and this and that. But it came down to the part where I really wanted to kind of start stacking my resume. And I thought that this would be a really cool and very different way to do it.
And so when you went into that world, so it sounds like too, this was you starting it. This wasn't, sometimes people have had other family members, their parents or friends that are doing it. So they're kind of brought into it because they have a familiarity or a connection to it. Right. But this was really you starting. And I think a lot of people have those preconceived notions about the pageant world, particularly because maybe they have seen Toddlers and Tiaras or they have seen just, what's the Sandra Bullock movie, Miss Congeniality. There are beautiful points to that movie, but also a lot of things that aren't super, focused on what it actually is. And so they're hearing this and they're like, okay, so this is really just a competition for pretty people to be told they're pretty and to be, you're on display and there's the body image stuff and there's all this, we're promoting things we shouldn't be promoting and ridiculous beauty standards. We're also just limiting people to these few things. Was that your experience when you got started? Is that what happened?
Initially, when I got started, it wasn't, because I think I was all caught up in the newness of everything, that at that point, I don't think I was as jaded as I am now. And in knowing the ins and outs and having been, a mentor and a judge and kind of knowing the ins and outs a little bit more and having participated and been behind the scenes. But at that time, that wasn't my experience. I know I went into it my very first competition and I walked away with so many new friends and connections that I still keep in touch with to this day. And I had this opportunity to talk about, at that time, my platform was all about liver disease awareness because I had just lost my grandfather at that time to liver cancer. And it was a chance for me to just talk about it. And it was really cathartic and everyone was really welcoming. But at the same time, there was also this very first experience where I was not only competing with myself. I think a lot of times in the pageant world, we say that you're really only competing with yourself, but it's natural human nature to compare ourselves to other people. It's kind of that survival tactic. So it was really one of the first times in my life, aside from, cheer and dance in high school where we were competing against other teams. But it was really the first time in my life where I was putting myself in a lineup against other women that I grew close to and cared about, and also knew that they were also high achieving and talented and wonderful people. But it was my first time standing in that place thinking, okay, what do I do? What do I do with this experience? And what is this going to do for me throughout my adulthood too?
Oh, that's so interesting. So you have this kind of both and. I mean, like you said, it is human nature. My most recent, I think, comparison point was when I had Everly, and like realizing how quickly we assess how good we are as a parent or a caregiver by how poorly someone else is doing or how much better we perceive someone else is doing. And so
exactly,
you have this thing going on, but you're also trying to be supportive. You love these people. You get to know them on such a deep level. So part of you wants them all to do well. And then the other part of you is like, but I still want to win. And my worth and value, not necessarily just because of the pageant world, but because we're a shame-based culture that's like how you achieve compared to other people defines you. So you're holding that at the same time.
Exactly.
Ooh, that's a lot at 17.
It's heavy at 17. Yeah. And I felt like at that time too, I mean, I was the oldest of 5 kids. I've always felt like I had this natural leadership role in my life. And it was kind of just this unsaid expectation. I come from a really supportive household, and I'm really thankful for that. But it was just this expectation that I was kind of that leader. And I thought, I can handle this. I'm 17, but I can handle this sort of competition. So I didn't really blink twice.
Do you think there was a part of you that it was hard for, and you just kind of told that part to be quiet, or that the expectation was that we keep that secret? Or do you really think it was just in the beginning, I was good? And then you mentioned sort of the jadedness, the feelings now, that really didn't happen until you started to see the curtain come up.
Yes. Yep. It wasn't until I kind of started to see the curtain come up and kind of saw how the experience affected other people sometimes, and saw how it affected a lot of my really good friends and people that I loved and cared about, and how it could have affected them negatively. And I've done a lot of therapy in my life, and a lot of times pageantry comes up as one of the topics that we talk about, and how that has affected not necessarily my own life experience, because in elements, in ways that it has, but the way that I care about other people, and the way that I care about my friends, and wanting them to excel and exceed. And I think it was until I dove in a little bit further that I really recognized the effect this had on the people around me, and the way that I viewed myself too.
Well, and it's interesting because I want to dive into that, and I want to hear about the stories that started happening for you, what you watched happening to other people. But I'm also curious. So my comparison piece, Everly just started a new school, and I'm the one that picked it. Like, Jordan and I are a united front. He does what he can, but like, I'm the one with the schedule that allows me to go see the schools and do all the things. And like, part of the reason our system works is we can each kind of have our funnels and our bundles of things that we oversee. And then we took her to school the first day. It was great. But when we picked her up, her lead teacher is gone this week. She's starting in the middle of their school year. Like, they got her in early. There's so many moving parts. My mother-in-law was packing up and getting ready to leave, which has been chaotic and has been, my daughter's other person for the last 3 years. So I'm holding all that. But then when I would go to pick them up, the teacher in the room had a little episode of Franklin playing, and all the kids were there while they were getting ready for nap. And there's supposed to be a no screen space. And that's a big thing that's important to us. And my sister-in-law was here, and she runs a learning center. She runs a preschool. And so she saw it. And I instantly felt both sides. I felt like this, I don't like that this is happening. I want to say something now, but I'm also realizing it's day one. Like I could give it a week. If she watched a 10-minute episode of Franklin for a week, still she'd be fine. Like take a breath. But I also immediately felt defensive of the school because I had picked it, because I was the one that was responsible for this. So I couldn't have fucked up and picked the wrong thing. It had to be good. It had to be okay. And so before we go into what you started to notice and what you experienced, I'm wondering if that came up for you at all, because you chose to get into this. I'm assuming that some people around you didn't understand it or had preconceived notions. And so there's like a both and of I'm seeing this stuff, but I also, one, have to be the person that can handle it, like you said, because you're the leader. But two, I feel like I have to defend the thing that I'm doing to make sure that somebody else doesn't have a one up on me because I chose this. Did that happen for you at all?
Oh my gosh, Kira, 100%. And it's still something that I feel like I have to defend, even though I'm not participating directly as a competitor, but as like a mentor, as a volunteer, that's someone who's still involved and supporting other women during their experiences too. There was this point where I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like I can't really be annoyed or upset by this because I put myself in this position. This is something that I chose to do and I really wanted to do. And I've invested so much time and energy and really my young adulthood to this experience. And I don't have space or I don't have room to be upset or ashamed by that. And sometimes in the pageant world, there are many times in the past and still to this day where it's hard to defend at times. Especially given some of the values that I have, there are times where it doesn't match. And I feel that I need to defend that. And early on when I started it, there were so many questions from friends of mine or family members or even significant others at the time that were like, why are you doing this? This seems so bizarre and antiquated, and it doesn't match with who I think that you are. And that was really hard to get through. It's still kind of hard to do that. And so I felt this sense of, no matter what I do, every part of this experience, I need to show up for myself and prove that I am still this person, despite whatever is going on in this weird world and industry that might be problematic at times too.
And I wonder if that's where then the integration piece came in of, I do want to be a part of this world. And I also have to come to terms with any system I'm a part of has flaws and has problems. And so I can use my voice to create change within those systems as opposed to walk away from it. And I know even you mentioned before we came on to record, like you have this awareness of privilege and also systems of oppression and how that has maybe affected you, but there's probably ways that I think about this all the time as a woman, white presenting. And I say that because I didn't find out I was Middle Eastern until I was pregnant with Ev, because I don't know who my dad is. And so it's like, so I have the benefits now of like, I'm white presenting, which means I've been treated as a white human in the world, which is always going to be treated a little bit higher and hopefully not always and forever. But up to this point, like I've benefited, but I also now have this mark that's like a multicultural link. And so there's weird benefits that I don't feel like I have the right to claim now. I'm in a smaller body. I have, all of a certain degree of socioeconomic status.
Yes.
So I'm aware of all those things. And the hard part is sometimes knowing you're benefiting from it, but also knowing you need to fight against it. And knowing that part of the reason you can fight against it in the position you're in is because of the person that you are and the privileges you have. And so it's a swirly, twirly experience to also then at the end of the day, stay true to yourself and your values and to not be swayed by the people around you to give that up or to just go along with things and I think for you, I'm curious too, as you've evolved in the ways you participate, how you've had to find that too, like knowing how you've engaged in pageants has changed as a competitor, how you've engaged, the reasons you're still connected are very differently rooted than the reasons you started. And so I'm curious, okay, let's go back then to the veil being lifted. You started to see some of these effects. Let's talk about your own experience first. What was the biggest thing you saw for you? Where did the wearing down or that pain start to show up for you?
I think it started my first time that I was at a state competition. So I had competed in local competitions in the Miss America organization for 3 years until I actually earned a spot at Miss Wisconsin. So you
Okay.
need to earn a local title first before you advance to that next step. So I've been competing on the local level, and it's volunteer based. So there's a lot of really wonderful people who are donating their time and talents. And it was just a really wholesome experience, I would
Hmm.
say. And then once it got to the state level, expectations increase. There's, one spot for a woman to win Miss Wisconsin, and you get this opportunity to go to Miss America and you travel the state. And essentially, it's a job for an entire year. So the
Wow.
stakes really amp up at that point. And I noticed myself feeling like I had to prove that I earned this spot here, and I had to
Mm.
prove every single reason why I was one of, say, 25, 26 women on that stage who were deemed the best in the state. Um, and that was really challenging too, that I felt like I needed to prove that I earned my place there.
Mhm.
And that, of course, then unleashed a lot of different feelings too of, am I good enough to be here? Would someone else deserve this more than me?
Mm.
Um, there were a lot of thoughts of that in the beginning, but also that perfectionism came back into play too. Something I've always struggled with and continue to battle in therapy at times. And thinking, how can I be the best? How can I improve my talent, my interview? How can I say the right things, do the right things, be this ideal person that I want to be to, one, impress the judges enough to give me this job, but two, not disappoint my family and friends who have supported me up to that point too.
Wow.
Um, and I feel really fortunate to come from a circle of really supportive family members and friends, and a very supportive partner. And um, so that's still something that I kind of struggle with a little bit, thinking, I know that they're going to support me either way, no matter how I do, if I end up dead last or if I walk away with a crown. But I still want to prove to them that I did well, and I am doing this because I'm a great person and I have so much to give. And so that was a huge challenge too. I think my first year at the state competition in 2016.
Wow. I mean, and I think two things you said that are really sticking with me. So, one, that perfectionism piece, which is sometimes short in people's stories, it does come from the external environment. They grew up in households where they were constantly chasing validation or didn't
Mhm.
experience that sense of enoughness. Sounds like you didn't have that. You did play a slight role where you were sort of became a leader in the household dynamic, which will have its own input because you have to
Right.
prove your spot and prove that you can handle it, like you said. And so handling it means not crumbling under pressure, not, wanting to withdraw, not losing your shit ultimately in the
Yep.
midst of it all. So there's that. But the interesting thing you said is you said, impressing the judges to, I think you said, earn this job or get this job. And so it was interesting as
Mhm.
you said job that landed with me different because I think a lot of people see this as just like basically somebody standing on stage and being told you're pretty enough, you're good
Right.
enough. Like
Right.
you are, here's this thing, and then you go to a couple parades and you get to just be like doted on. But there is, how did you understand? Because it doesn't sound like that's what you were chasing, especially
Right.
considering that all your friends are like, this doesn't feel like you. So the you that was showing up, what did you understand the job to be? And why was it something that you were applying for and interviewing for in that moment?
Mhm. Yeah, I really early on when I thought of it first is that, toddlers and tiaras really glamorous opportunity. It
Right.
was, fitting into that myth that it is just,
Yeah.
this thing where you just get to wear a pretty dress and walk around and you walk away and it's done. But when I really got involved and when I started uh, preparing for these competitions and preparing for a 10-minute interview with judges who can ask me anything and everything about politics, about my morals, about my goals, about my personal and professional aspirations. When I was preparing my talent and figuring out how to best show off my technical expertise and in dance, which was my talent. And you really had to do a lot of digging and understanding yourself and what you wanted to bring to the table in this role. So as I started to get more involved and understand what exactly this position was meant for, um, I learned that it truly is a job. For example, Miss Wisconsin in the Miss America organization, she dedicates an entire year to traveling all over the state, partnering with nonprofits, and she's kind of a spokesperson essentially for the state of Wisconsin. And it's 100% a real life job where you're traveling and you're connecting with people and you're a spokesperson and giving speeches and all of this. And I thought to myself, I want this job because I feel that I can be a great representative for not only this organization, but I'm proud of who I am and what I represent, and the messages that I have to share. And I feel that I could be a great role model for other people as well in this position. But it was a lot of also reflecting on the ways that I relate to other people, because Miss Wisconsin was a job where I would be talking to little kids in a classroom, all the way to visiting seniors in a retirement home, or visiting with veterans, or talking with people that have special needs. I needed to be someone who could relate to a lot of different people and represent them appropriately. And I felt that my background could accurately do that. So it was so much personal reflection and understanding who I was and what I could bring to the table and what I wanted to bring to the table too. And kind of creating my own mold for what I envisioned Miss Wisconsin to be, and continuing to elevate that too, and kind of like prove everyone wrong and say, you know, Miss Wisconsin shows up in an event, I want to just smash all of their expectations as to who she is, because I have so much more to bring to the table.
I love that. And I also am curious, you know, being from Wisconsin originally, and whether people are familiar with Wisconsin or familiar with other states. A lot of states have different, you know, you said they can ask you about politics. They can ask you about your stance on vaccines, COVID, like they can ask you whatever they want.
Yes.
Did you ever, you know, for people who aren't familiar, Wisconsin has pockets of more liberal, condensed liberal places, but there are obviously people that are more liberal and more conservative all over. A lot of Wisconsin is more conservative. And I would say the majority of people identify as conservative. And so did you, when you'd get asked questions, did you ever not say what you really felt because you knew they wanted to hear something? Or did you ever feel like, was it mastering the art of, you know, the political leader, knowing what to say without saying anything? Like, how did you handle that? Because I feel like that I would, when I was 10 doing it. So they weren't asking me about my political ideology. They were asking something, you know, how do you be kind to the world? And then I did a little dance and we all wore like really fun outfits, you know, so that was such a different experience. So how'd you deal with that?
Oh, well, early on when before I really dove in and started to learn a little bit more about what exactly this experience was, and what I was signing up for, I think I tried to lean into that political correctness. I tried to stay really neutral and in the middle. And that at the time, maybe aligned. I mean, at 17, I didn't feel like I had really strong political opinions. I wasn't as involved as I am now, of course.
Right.
But as I started to learn a little bit more about how I needed to prepare and how I needed to have a really strong moral compass, not only to handle the job, but also to just present myself well in the interview setting. They need to know who I am and what I'm all about. But I needed to carefully present it in a way where I could still be a good representative for everyone, no matter what my personal viewpoints for. And I think that was where I had to master this level of communication of, being compassionate and understanding of other people's viewpoints, but still being firm in my beliefs as well. So now as a mentor on the other side, I always tell the girls that I work with, I need you to just answer right away. No matter what the issue is or what the topic is, I need you to answer it and then just give me a reason to back it up. There's no way for me to argue with that as a judge if you have your belief and you back it up with your reasoning, because that shows me who you are and it shows me that you're well spoken and you to be able to share that. So early on, definitely stayed more middle of the road just to try and fit this mold that I thought that they wanted. But as I grew and learned to understand what they were not only what they were looking for, they were looking for someone who's well spoken and can be a good representative. But they want someone who is also definitive and knows who they are, and is proud of that too. So I really started to lean in that toward the back end of my participation as a competitor.
And I think that's interesting too, because I think a lot of us do that. I remember the first year I could vote. I remember if I was 18 or 19, but I voted like my friends' parents voted because I was like, oh yeah, I'm that person. Like that sounds good. Like anybody could talk me into anything because I hadn't had the experience in the world yet to know what I felt about certain things. And I think just the more you explore stuff, and also the older I get, the more I realize nobody's really right. Like we all just, it's all a subjective interpretation of the world. And like the only thing I can know is that I ultimately know nothing. You know, like every time I'm like, somebody's selling me on, this is the way you parent. It's like, cool, but maybe not. Like there was this TikTok trend that I think went around if your kid's having a tantrum that you just like get up and you run a circle around them and you just like distract them, basically just like running and they'll stop. And I tried it one time. I really looked at me like, what the fuck are you doing? And I was like, okay. And then just like went back to what she's doing. I was like, see, it doesn't always work, but like you try things. And I think with your stance, the definitiveness is being very clear about who you are, what you value, and then how that shows up in whatever those points are. Mm-hmm. But I'm curious because you got in the door. And again, we talked about sort of the systems of oppression and privilege and maybe where people aren't getting in. Who are the people that you think they weren't even getting in the door to have their voices heard? Was that something you started to pay attention to? And who did you see not getting those same opportunities?
Yes, it became much more clear as during the latter end of my participation, probably within the past like 5 years or so, it became much more clear. And it definitely depends on the kind on the pageant organization you participate in. Because there are different, rules and regulations with each one. But I think the most consistent thing that I noticed was that a lot of times, and this is the part where kind of that shame and defensiveness comes in with, feeling like I am participating and I need to defend the organizations that I volunteer with and I'm still a part of and have history with. But there are still those pieces of it that celebrate whiteness and thinness and heteronormativity and wealth. And that element of pageantry is still very much alive as much as we try to combat that. And we try to, select representatives who are, I say representatives like political representatives, really pageant title holders are community representatives in a way. As much as we try to challenge that and get away from that. And there have been incredible examples of women who have held titles that totally go against, what our traditional beauty standards are and what we think of when we think of a pageant girl. It's like a tall, blonde, white woman. There have been amazing examples of that, but there is still this underlying feeling that I think I have, and a lot of people sometimes recognize but don't talk about, is that there is still that privilege in whiteness, in straightness, in wealth. And I consistently have found that plus size girls just simply don't do as well. They don't score as well. Women of color, participation for women of color has been very low in the areas that I've been in. Granted, I come from central Wisconsin, so generally that demographic tends to be more white. And I have noticed over time that, I have plus size friends that have just not done or scored as well as I have. And they are equally, if not more talented and wonderful and service minded. And that is a part that I am still toying with a little bit and struggle with at times when I defend the organizations that I'm a part of, because there are so many pieces of that I still notice.
Well, and again, I think it's that hard piece of, in any system or thing that we're a part of, it's recognizing everything is human driven. I mean, at least right now, I was joking about AI this morning and I'm like right now excited, but I don't really know what's going to happen.
Who knows, right?
But it is this realization that regardless of where we stand, we've all been conditioned by the same world to believe the same things. And so I think the part, and I don't know, because I'm still learning this too, but I think a big part of this is not being afraid to call it out that it's an issue and realizing it can be a both and. There are problems within a system, and it's important that we continue to name them and figure out what we can do to work through it and to work past it. And I can imagine part of it is, like you said, having a definitive stance on who you are and to be well spoken, the standards for you as, in a thinner white body,
Yeah.
cisgender and like presenting in a certain way, that nature of definitiveness and maybe the flexibility of what you believe might look different than somebody in a bigger body who's Black. And so part of your job now as maybe a mentor or somebody doing interviews like this is to name that that's an issue, because that creates collective accountability, but then also to continue to support people in those different aspects of their body and identity to still feel proud and to compete with themselves in the way of, did you show up and be your full self? Because ultimately, and this is maybe where I'm going to bridge into your most recent competition for yourself. And like the way that you change that is, at the end of the day, it's still a human on the other side that's giving you marks.
Yeah.
And there's going to be bias and subjective nature in that. And so can you compete and have fun and do well, and then also come back at the end of it and say, am I the person I wanted to be when I finish this competition? And can I compete in a system where I see these things happening? I can be a part of the voice in making those changes, but also the testament is not losing yourself in that system and you staying strong and more people continuing to do that. Because I'm assuming that's part of why you stay, is that opportunity for people to have that experience, as opposed to the goal being, did 3 people that are judging you decide you were the best person in the room?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And, the most recent competition at Miss Wisconsin USA just a few weeks ago, I had gone in with a very different mindset because I had a 5-year gap from the last time I competed to this time. And it was a completely different organization as well. I had never competed in the Miss USA, Miss Universe organization. So I came into it, really wanting to give myself an opportunity to enjoy it and kind of lose this pressure that I had always had on myself in the past when I was 21, 22 competing the last time, and now 27 having more life experience and knowing how those experiences felt when I was younger, and wanting to give myself a chance to have fun and be present and recognize that I was using this as an opportunity, not only to hold a title. And of course, I still have that huge goal in mind, but to also allow myself to take the process and just run with it and recognize and be aware when I was having self-doubt and limiting beliefs. And I had an awesome mindset coach that I was working with, and she had kind of helped keep me accountable in that throughout the process. And I think that was so valuable for me to really invest in that for this time around in my preparation process. So I could really focus on that, because I've also been much more open about my mental health in the past few years. And I knew that I wanted to really honor that through this experience and give myself one last shot at trying something really hard and scary and difficult. But I wanted to go into it with this idea that I'm doing this for me and to give myself a chance to do this totally freely, zero pressure, as much zero pressure as you can when you're comparing, when you're preparing for a competition. But yeah, that was challenging to go into it with that mindset. But I think that an element of why I still stay involved is to give other women that opportunity too, and to challenge them to, lose those expectations that you have of yourself, and know that and recognize really why you're doing this. Go back to that why. Why did you step into this, and why did you start doing this, and what have you learned through this process about yourself? I helped a friend of mine, one of my very best friends, last year prepare for a competition when I was not competing, and we focused just a lot about personal stuff. Like, what are your goals? What are your dreams? What do you want to get out of this? Because it's so much more than what you see on stage. It's just this personal growth and development that you experience that I think has made such a lasting impact on the way that I feel about myself and the way that I present myself and the way that I interact with other people has been so directly impacted by this whole preparation process. And I really want to give other women the opportunity to explore that. And the competition is just that tiny part of it. It's like the 2-day experience. that is a culmination of all of this work beforehand that is the most impactful piece. But then you also have to think about what happens afterward too. After you walk off of the stage, how do you feel about yourself? Are you proud of what you put in leading up to this? Are you proud of what you showcased because you had worked so hard for it? Or do we find ourselves stuck again in that perfectionism and feeling like, oh, what if I did this better? What if I were a different gown? What if I, said this answer a little bit differently on stage? Would they have selected someone else? And chances are probably not, because you gave all that you had to give. And there's still those systems that, the judges keep in mind as they're selecting their winner. And sometimes we just can't control that.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's interesting because as you were saying that, I was thinking about, where do I stand on the idea of promoting systems of competition, but also thinking about inclusion and supporting and celebrating each individual person. And I'm thinking about an interview that Giannis gave after the Bucks lost in the finals. And basically somebody asked him, I can't remember what the question was a reporter asking him about, basically, you guys choked. How do you feel about that? And I think it was like almost that poorly worded too. And his response was so like thought provoking. And he basically said to the effect of, do you get a promotion after every article you write? Like, do you get celebrated every time you do something? And then I think he compared it to maybe Michael Jordan or somebody else who's like, they played for X number of years and had won X number of championships, and you aren't focused on how many years he didn't win a championship. And so it's the idea that how could I don't think the answer in everything is like, no more competitions. I think that's the reverse of, every kid now gets a fucking participation trophy just for showing up and doing something. Like it is okay to create systems where people can win and people can compete. And I think it's creating an awareness that form of competition opens the door to unresolved shame and pain if we're not careful. And so you need to be responsible when you're designing systems to think about that. And also, I think as the participant, be responsible in recognizing that's going to be there. You are not immune to that. You are not going to be fine. Even if you are crowned the winner, even if you win the championship, like you're still going to have these things that you have to face. It's the same as people that have had trauma and they're like, well, when I make X amount of money or when I get married or I have this many things or I reach this level of success, I'll be fine. And then they're not. And oftentimes we've seen the data has shown they're actually more mentally unstable, unwell, unhappy, unfulfilled, whatever words. And so I think it's that. And I think that's the thing I'm sitting with right now is I think conversations like this and keeping the door open are more of what we need to talk about, because we can't just throw out every system on the planet. We can't just, we have to acknowledge, I think about, both of us have partners in medicine. Medicine has historically been embedded with racism. Black people don't trust the environment of, medicine and the system here, especially in the US. Well, we can't just say, well, scrap it, no more medicine. We have to say, no, that's true. That happened. There is an accountability piece and there is a benefit to the system. We need to create a system that includes everybody and works on building and rebuilding trust with the people it has wronged in the past. And so I think that's what I'm sitting with right now is how do we grapple with that? And I'm assuming that's the thing you sit with. And that's the thing that now that your friends, your family, the people are like, why are you doing this? They've had a chance to witness that in you, because I think it's you using your voice, but also trying to understand the voices of other people and how we hold both in these systems.
Yes. Oh, exactly. And there are women that I know, and I think there are some huge wins that have come out of pageantry in the last handful of years. Like the Miss Universe organization has a trans woman who is the leader. Like she is the head of the organization, which is a huge step in progress. And the Miss USA organization allows trans women to compete now, which was unheard of years ago. And so there are definitely some steps in the right direction. And I think that now I think title holders and women who are participating are much more comfortable in talking about things that matter to them and calling out these problems. Like, for example, it's no secret or anything. It's public knowledge. Anyone can access it, that there are many pageant organizations that have in the contract that you must be a natural born female to participate. And that's still something that a lot of women who participate really struggle with. It's something that I struggle with as a mentor and a volunteer now, still participating in the organizations. It's something that I frankly don't believe in and doesn't align with my values. But it's a piece where I feel women have felt like they can still stand up for it and say, this is something that we really need to change. Even while they're holding a title or they're participating, they say, I'm participating in this program because it's given me so many benefits. I feel like I've grown so much through this, but there are still so many changes that I'd like to see. And that's why I'm staying involved. And I think that's the piece that keeps me involved as well, is because I think that my participation has also helped me gain this voice and this better understanding of what I believe in. And what better way to use that voice than to change it from the inside out, like you said, and try and make change within organizations that have changed my life. So I think that's why I stay involved. I still feel like that the women who are involved and who have made such a great impact on these organizations now have this really strong voice that they can use to benefit it and move the organizations forward in that way.
So I'm thinking about this I told you before we hit record, I could talk to you about this I could just talk to you for a very long time on this topic or anything. Just being, mindful of our time and wanting to just kind of think about how we put it so people aren't listening for, taking a 16-hour drive around the country.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, right. When you go back to you at 10 or 12, or when you think about, the 5-year-olds, the 8-year-olds, the 10-year-olds that are seeing this and they want to do this, what do you want them to know? What do you want those young people to hold on to or to know? Or what would you want to gift them with then to help them experience this the ways that you came to understand as you got older?
I think that being part of an organization where you are being judged, you are, there's a rubric, there's a level of expectations that a panel of judges are looking for in someone. I want them to know that, and I tell the girls that I work with now, that you create your own mold for what this looks like. And you have the power to do that. We've seen it be done in the past of women who have stepped into these roles who are from very interesting backgrounds that don't meet the standard expectation that we would see in a title holder. And really hold on to that belief that who you are is inherently good enough just because you are the way that you are. And that a panel of judges cannot determine that. And I think holding that really close to you would be really beneficial in starting this experience. And also spending a lot of time, as much, if not more time than you spend preparing for each area of competition for the tangible piece of a pageant. Spend as much time, if not more time, reflecting and being present with yourself and the way that you feel during these experiences too. That's something that I wish that I would have done earlier on. I wish that I had journaled more through the early experiences and how I was feeling, because I think I just brushed it off and forgot about it at the time.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I was preparing most recently where I really dug into the way that my mind was and the behaviors that I had when I had been preparing for competitions in the past. And so I think journal and reflect on your why and understand what you feel you're put in this position for and what you can do with that. I love my journal so much. So I'll preach anytime that I can say journal about it, put your feelings on paper.
But we all know the power of it. That's why, once we all got past that, dear diary, this is how I feel today. And I have to neatly write it and have a resolution. Once you get to that point where you realize it's just a place to get it out of your head. And that is, you hit on basic tenets of shame resilience without even, I think, being aware of it. nobody gets to define your worth and value but you. And you are going to be drawn to that, to other people doing that. That is the system we live in. So again, part of the shame resilience is radical acceptance about the world we live in. That doesn't mean we tolerate it. We can change it, but still recognizing that's a part of it. And then that second piece of not allowing yourself to stay in it. And so getting it out, putting it in your journal, going to therapy, talking to a coach, talking to a mentor, talking to your friends, and also not being swayed. I think you modeled that for us, and that idea of people not necessarily understanding why you were doing it. And they didn't know your why. And maybe at the time you weren't just clear on it either, but being okay with trying something that might not make sense to everyone else and might not even make sense to you. And it sounds like that sort of openness of exploration is another big thing that really allowed you to find your voice in this as well.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was a completely voluntary experience. It's something that I chose. And I think that there's some power in that as well, that I get to choose how I treat this experience and what I put into this experience too. And yeah, to that I say, while pageants are so bizarre and challenging, and it's hard to really understand what exactly some people get out of it. I will say though that it has changed my life and challenged me in ways that I don't think I could have ever gotten in other areas of my life or through any other experience. I think that you're truly looking for a challenge, for diving into the deep parts of yourself and what you value and how you react in very competitive environments and scenarios where sometimes your self-worth can take a hit and you take that risk. I've never experienced so much growth than when I have been preparing for something like this. And now as a mentor on the other side. So if you're ready to dive into a really hard personal challenge, just sign up for your next local pageant.
Well, and it sounds like, you, and I'll put all of your links down in the show notes too, but you being a resource for people if they are looking to do that. And
totally.
And I think maybe just sort of wrapping on the idea, as you said it, I came to this realization of when we hold these judgments, sometimes, especially out here, I notice Jordan and I kind of call it now I'm blanking on what we call it, but we do call it something. It's like the oppression police, but that's not the word that I'm thinking of, but it's people that will come in, social justice warrior.
Oh, yeah.
And sort of the idea behind it of even the other day, there's a show on Apple TV called Stillwater, and it's about this Zen Buddhist panda that been a show that they've it came from books that were written by an author who has roots in Zen Buddhism. I believe their father might have been a Zen Buddhist, might have been Chinese. There's a lot of roots to this story and why this book is called what it is, why the panda is called what it is, how the stories are done, the connections back to history and all these things. But somebody heard that Everly's favorite show is Stillwater, and then they immediately made assumptions that was cultural appropriation and all these ways that it was probably rooted in racism, and they hadn't even seen the show. And I think sometimes what happens is we're so, particularly now in the age of social media and the social justice movement, sometimes I think that quickness for judgment is actually a detriment to the progress we can make. And I've seen this. Yes. I mean, representatives in the Black Lives Matter movement talked about this when, after multiple shootings and deaths by police, of your anger is founded, your anger is warranted, but we need to have conversations to understand and change systems. We're not tolerating these things by not being angry and aggressive, but we need to really think about how does change look in a long-standing way. And and I'm probably getting it wrong a little bit, but the idea of, we're tired too. We're not tolerating this by saying we don't need to go do X, Y, and Z things. And I think that's the thing too, is people making the judgments that the pageant world is just a bunch of, old white men, and every woman in it is promoting, idealization of a thin white body and all that.
Yeah.
I think it's the same thing. I think we're going too hard on the social justice side, where we're missing the point, and we're categorizing a lot of people in ways that's unfair to them. And we're missing the way that there are people using their voice to try to change the conversation. And so
Yes.
I think maybe just imploring all of us to think more deeply about everything that we're doing and how we're showing up in it. How do we ask questions to really understand? Because there are, we're all a little bit racist. We're all a little bit sexist. We're all a little, whatever it is.
Yeah.
We've all got it. But there are some people that truly are mean, horrible people that just want to see people suffer and have no interest in talking about anything but that because of their backgrounds. But that's not the majority. And I think what you're seeing is that there's a different way we could talk about this. There's a different way, and you've held on to it long enough that you can hold both. And you're not afraid to call out the problems. And a lot of people, it sounds like, are not afraid to call out the problems, but you're also not afraid to help figure out solutions. And I think that's the shift for many of us. And so if you know people that have done these competitions, if you know people, again, in any platform, any space, any place where you've got those quick judgments and points, is recognizing that oftentimes the story, there's much more to the context and the experience. And what if we looked for depth and understanding rather than judgment and quick categorization?
Yep. You nailed it.
Oh, okay. Well, again, I could continue this forever, but for now, I just thank you. This has been incredible. I appreciate so much that we got to do this and to think about this whole world in a different way. So thank you for using your voice and to being here and just to inviting that curiosity for all of us.
Thank you for providing this platform. This is so important. And I think this was also very cathartic for me to be able to share that experience and what I've learned through it and gained through it too. So thank you as well.
Awesome. Well, everybody, if you were as in love with this conversation as I was, please share it with somebody else so they can hear it. We can continue to rewrite those stories. I'll put all the links to connect with Jessica down in the show notes so that you'll have all of that available to you. And as always, I will see you next Sunday.